Welcome to my How Healthy Are You weekly educational podcast. My name is Dr. Thomas Brewer. I'm a PhD chemist and nutritional blood microscopist. Today is November 29th, 2021, and this is podcast number 109. Now, this podcast is going to be a follow-up to the podcast on November 1st, 2021, which was numbered 107, and that podcast was titled The 6 Pillars of Aging, where I talk about the cells and the engines in the cells, like the mitochondria and the various diseases that most people end up dying of. So this one is going to be on foods for longevity. And before I get started, though, I wanted to say something briefly about the Cerveza Sickness. First is if you've lost your taste, and most people have had this sickness by now. It's a very high percentage of the population. If you've lost your taste, what you want to do is take about 7 to 10 milligrams of zinc per day. Now, that would be a full daily allowance. You will also get zinc from your food, but somewhere between 7 to 10 milligrams of zinc a day, you'll notice you'll be getting your taste back. The other thing to do, if you have any of these pandemic viruses, you want to at least eat 1 orange per day for vitamin C, and this is superior to buying your vitamin C. Also eat a few Brazil nuts a day for selenium. Again, this is better than supplementing and buying supplements and all the various fillers, and you have these absorption issues. Always better to get your nutrition from food when you can. If you're having trouble breathing, you can aspirate the lightning colloidal silver. I had details of that in a previous podcast, which is just entitled Colloidal Silver. So refer back to that. Those are all on my YouTube channel. And if you don't have access, just call me and I'll give you the dosages. Long term, you want to take 3 Steromax per day. This is what keeps your immune system strong and active. There will be more new pathogenic variants. They're all coming. This is going to be the standard operating procedure for many years, so get your immune system strong. Now, let's get started on food and longevity, foods for longevity. So food is really an anti-aging drug, and there's good foods that help us, and there's other foods that contribute to inflammation and excessive aging. One of the bad ones is wheat. Most people think if they don't have celiac disease, it's okay for them to eat wheat. Well, you can eat it. It's not going to kill you on the spot, but all wheat causes inflammation and gastrointestinal distress. It contributes to autoimmune disease. And what happens with wheat, no matter who you are, it stimulates an overrelease of something called zonulin. This is a protein. And the reason this is a big problem is this protein controls the permeability of the junctions between the cells in your gut, meaning it leads to leaky gut. So when you have excess of this zonulin protein, the gaps between your intestinal cells open. This allows bacteria, even undigested food, toxins, to get into your bloodstream. That's why I see parasitic bacteria in people's blood when I look at their blood under a microscope. So a big cause for parasitic bacteria getting into your blood is eating wheat. Okay, so this goes beyond the gluten issue because all of the grains are grown and sprayed with an herbicide called glyphosate. And unless the grain is organic, the glyphosate is used. And this is the main ingredient in Roundup. I've talked about glyphosate in previous newsletters, or at least I wrote about it. So the problem with glyphosate is it's something to avoid, and it's sprayed on all the grains, and it's in many, many products. The health effects are extremely bad, all the way up to cancer. And the issue with glyphosate is it's hiding in a lot of products, because if you consume a meat or any animal product such as dairy, and the animal was fed grains, well, then they're consuming glyphosate, and then you're getting the glyphosate through the meat or the dairy. So glyphosate is hiding in a lot of feedlot meat, unless they are grass-fed, and non-organic milks, same thing. If you want longevity, you have to avoid grains because of the glyphosate, and you have to avoid animals that ate grains. And the only way to avoid animals that are eating grains is to have organic milk, because organic milk, the cow never received any food that's had glyphosate. Same thing with meat. You want grass-fed meat. Meat is not the enemy, but too much meat is. We'll get to that quite soon. An example would be, people think that bone broth is a great source of collagen, a good protein, a good building block protein. This is true. But when the bones are from conventionally raised chickens or beef, which means the chickens or beef ate grains, then it's full of glyphosate. It's essentially a landmine. So again, organic, grass-fed animal products, that's the way to go for longevity. And the other issue is elevated blood sugar is very aging. A lot of the grain-based foods are high glycemic index, and that's what raises our blood sugar. So another reason, be very careful with grains unless they're organic, and even if they are, they're going to raise your blood sugar. Now, let's go to the other extreme, and that is the vegan trap. Well, if you're not eating grains, then does that mean you should only eat vegetables? The bottom line is no. If you don't eat any animal fats and animal products, you'll end up consuming too many of what's called omega-6 polyunsaturated fats. So these are omega-6 fats. They're found in plants. And if you do this, it's going to eventually lower your thyroid function. You may feel good for about a month or two when you go vegan, but then it's all going to backfire. You need the right building blocks to make energy, and therefore the energy keeps your metabolism going so that you can burn fats and function. Your metabolism will slow down when you don't give your body the appropriate fats, and getting all your fats from plants is not the way to go. So another point, if I were to look at, say, a bottom line, you really don't want to eat too much meat, and you don't want to eat low-quality meat, but you also don't want to just eat vegetables. It is this fine balance between a small amount of high-quality meat and an appropriate amount of vegetables that have not been sprayed with glyphosate, which means they must be organic. Okay? If you were to look at what's been going on in the food industry, a lot of, well, at least there was this challenge between labeling organic food, but they could be made from genetically modified organisms. In the end, organic food can be made with genetically modified organisms. Well, that's a loss for us. However, still organic food cannot be sprayed with glyphosate. So even though there's genetically modified grains that are out there and they would survive the glyphosate, they can't use them if the grain is labeled organic. So therefore, the only way to avoid glyphosate is to eat organic. As far as avoiding genetically modified food, very, very difficult. Okay. Now, proteins, if they're charred or deep fried, there's no good amount to eat. So back to the meats, right? Same thing with proteins from industrial raised animals, which means they're eating grains. The grains had the glyphosate on them. If the protein is from gently cooked, grass-fed animals, fish, or even plant-based proteins such as hemp. Hemp is one of the best. You will be fine, okay? Now, if you eat a little less protein, and most people eat far too much protein because they're eating far too much meat and not high-quality meat. But if you eat a little less protein, you won't have less energy. What happens when we eat too much protein or essentially too much meat, the amino acids from the protein create a lot of waste, a lot more waste than if we were to burn fat or carbohydrates. So if the body is utilizing protein for energy, then there's a lot of excess waste. And that excess waste ferments in the gut, and I've talked about this in the past. It produces ammonia and nitrogen. That's the big problem, is when we consume too much meat. During the metabolism process, we make a lot of ammonia, which is extremely toxic to the body, and the body has to get rid of it. It takes a lot of energy, and it shortens our lives. So you want to consume just enough protein so it's a good building block to repair tissues, maintain muscle mass. But basically, we'd like to get our energy from the right fats, which we'll be getting to, fibers, which the fibers in the whole fruits and vegetables, and the carbohydrates, again, fruits and vegetables. When you eat right and you eat like this, your gut bacteria, the probiotic bacteria and the parasitic bacteria, this mixture of bacteria in your gut, they will transform the fiber from the vegetables into fatty acids, which is the best fuel source for the mitochondria. So I talked about mitochondria in the prior number 107 podcast, essentially longevity number 1. If you have excess protein and antibiotic contaminated meat or sugar, which I talked about in the previous one, you make these AGE molecules. Well, the gut bacteria don't function correctly. So too much protein, the gut bacteria don't function. Antibiotic contaminated meat, the same thing. And sugar, it destroys the ability of your gut bacteria to function properly. So one other advantage of not taking in too much protein, so essentially restricting your protein intake a little bit if you notice your plate is mainly meat, it helps boost cellular autophagy. I talked about that in the previous podcast. Autophagy is where you clean up the dead cells, and essentially you can use these dead cells for energy. So it's essentially the equivalent of burning your trash to stay warm. So you have these cells that need to be eliminated, and yet you can still burn them for energy. This is a win-win, and this is called cellular autophagy. This happens when you intermittent fast. This also happens when you sleep. So it's getting rid of the garbage in your system, and if there isn't enough time to do that, the toxins build up. So intermittent fasting, which I just touched on, is very useful in not only aiding fat loss and preventing cancer and building muscle. It is something that must be done correctly. I have talked about this in previous podcasts. This is where you don't eat for somewhere between 10 and 16 hours a day. Now, 10 is somewhat short, so normally it's between 12 and 16 hours a day. So you're only eating perhaps 8 to 12 hours per day. So in this 8 to 12 hour time frame, and that means no snacks, pretty much after dinner. That's really the easy way to do this, and this gives your body more time to clean up the garbage and to get energy from the garbage. That's a very good thing. Now, let's jump to fats. This first part was on grains and the best way to consume grains, which means you don't have a lot of choice. It's either organic, and even the organic grains, they are going to be high glycemic index. So grains are something to either eliminate or extremely reduce, and wheat itself is something to eliminate. But when it comes to fats, we want to eat grass-fed butter. That is the ultimate fat for our system, and it provides a lot of energy. So grains are bad, sugar is bad, fried stuff is bad, too much or too little protein is bad. But we need fats. Fats are what make the cellular membrane. And I'm going to talk a lot more about this topic in the next podcast next week. I'm going to go into more detail on fats and also ways to make your coffee essentially an energy drink. So that's what I have for this podcast. Please, if you're watching this on YouTube, leave a comment and like and even share the video. Thanks for listening.